Boys and girls, today we're going to go over these steps in the writing process. All good writers use these steps. And we have actually an 8-step writing process. It starts with something that you're always doing. Good writers are always watching everything around them. They're just looking for patterns, they're looking for interesting things, they're looking for interesting people. They're just always looking at the world around them. One thing that good writers do is they keep a journal, not necessarily a diary, but they keep a journal of interesting things they notice and see. Maybe interesting words they hear, new words they hear. They're just always keeping a journal and watching what's going on. The first really big step that authors do when they decide they're going to write a piece is they decide, what am I going to write about? Yes, Luke?
I have a question about step 0. Do they draw pictures or write about it, or do they do both?
Both, actually. That's a very good question. A lot of writers will observe the world through illustrations. So you can draw in your journal. If you've seen a scene that you really want to draw, you can write about it. Some people even put photographs of places they've been in their journals. So your journal is really just an idea of interesting things that are going on in your life and the world that you observe. Okay? Now, choosing an idea, a lot of times in schools, you don't have a choice of your idea. Your choice is given to you, especially if you have to take a writing test. That's called a prompt. We haven't done much of that in here. I kind of let you choose what you like to write about. But a prompt is write about a time you were scared. Write about a time when you had an adventure. Write about a time when you were happy. And you have to come up with some ideas. You also have to come up with what type of writing are you going to do. Are you going to write nonfiction or fiction? Are you going to write a personal narrative, which is a story about you? Or are you going to write a persuasive? Are you trying to convince somebody to do something? So you have to decide what you're going to write and what type of writing it's going to be. I always tell my students, talk with friends before you commit to an idea. Because you might think it's a great idea, but if you start talking to a friend, your friend might say, oh, I've read stories like that, lots and lots of stories. I don't think anybody would be interested. So authors do talk to their friends. Jaden?
Do some authors just write to be writing and then see how their story ends out and see what ideas they can get from it?
Do some authors write just to be writing a story? I guess sometimes authors will do that and see if it makes a good story. Some writers do that. There's not definite how to write. A lot of times it's you do what's best for you. Our next step is, what was the lesson learned? And this is strictly for personal narrative or fiction. You never want to write a story that doesn't leave your reader with a lesson learned. It's a boring story. You always want what we call, this is kind of like a theme, it's the takeaway. What do you want your reader to remember? What's the lesson? Sometimes we call them truisms. What do you want your truism to be? So it's your big idea. You have to decide that. And then here's the big step. This is, you have to pick a structure for your story. How will your story be structured? Will it go chronologically by how the events happen? And that's how most stories are structured. If you're doing a persuasive, it might be a good argument, a better argument, the best reason. If you're writing nonfiction, you might put groups of things that are similar together. Okay? So you have to choose your structure. We choose a thinking map or graphic organizer that fits the structure so we can do our planning. And this is the step where you also do your planning for your story. Yes, Kayla?
What is chronological?
Good question. Chronological means it happens in the order that your story happens in the same order that the events really happen. First, next, 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 and last. Okay? Yes, Andy?
So if you're on like whatever type of story you want to do, do you have to have like every little fact in the story have to be like like it doesn't have to like support the type of story, whatever you have?
You always want everything in your story to have a purpose. So you don't just throw something in there that your reader thinks, oh my goodness, why is that in there? Because it confuses your reader. So everything that you put in your story should have a purpose, okay? And it should be helping your reader understand the main idea, the theme of your story. Yes, Peyton?
But what if what if your story doesn't have a truism? Like if it's a story where someone just gets rescued, like in Hatchet?
Well, but we talked about all those themes in Hatchet, didn't we? Like persevering and never give up and believe in yourself. So those themes were there. Okay, so everybody's story should have some sort of theme or truism or big idea. And we write short stories, we don't write novels. Hatchet had lots of different themes. Your stories will probably just have one theme. Your adventure stories will have one theme, because you'll write maybe 2 pages at the most, and that's a short story. All right, the next thing, this is the hardest part. This is drafting your story. This is where you sit down and you get your paper and pencil or your Chromebook and your Google Docs and you write your story. You get it all out of your head and you get it onto paper. And this is probably the longest part in the process. You want to make sure that you spell the best you can in your first draft, but don't stress if you don't know how to spell a word. Just put it down and keep going. You want to use all the fun things that we have learned how to make stories interesting, strong verbs, sensory details, similes, different parts of speech, and here's a big one. Don't just write a whole different story than what you did in your planning over here. Go back and check your planning, and when you've put the things in your story that were in the planning, check them off to make sure you've gotten everything and you haven't left anything out, okay? This is the fun part of writing. This is where you get to get your friends involved. The first step in the fun part is your peer conference. You get to take your story, you get to find a friend, you have a checklist, and you get to read your story to a friend. And your friend, their job is to help you make your story the best you can be. So your friend gives you feedback if there was anything that was confusing, what they really liked about your story, what you could improve on in your story. And this is just good practice for critical thinking, because if you are analyzing somebody else's story, it then helps you to analyze your own story. Then, after you've done all these steps, I finally get to help you. You get to have your teacher conference. By the time you come to me, your story should almost be perfect, okay? Your friends should have helped you. Maybe you've even had 2 peer conferences because it was really confusing. But by the time you get to me, we should not really have to redo your story at all. It's fun to hear your student's story. I like you to read them to me. That's really fun. And this step, a lot of teachers don't like to do because it takes a long, long time. There's 18 of you and 1 of me. It takes a long time. But this one is so worth it. All right. And then this is the super duper fun part. This is where you get to take your story, put a cover on it, illustrate it, pick a really awesome title, put the title on it. You get to do the about the author page, and this is where all the artwork comes in. And I know, who loves artwork? Raise your hand. Okay, so this is what we do when we have big writing projects. We go through all of these steps, and we're going to be going through all these steps with our adventure project in just a little while here.